The station hadn't seen a train in 2, maybe 3 days. No one kept count no more. Not in that part of the desert where the dust rode harder than the law. There she was, curled on that splintered bench, wrapped in a faded shawl that had once been blue, now more the color of sorrow. Folks passed her by like she was part of the furniture. The boys threw pebbles, the sheriff looked the other way, and the station master pretended she was just a ghost waiting on a train that would never come. She was a nurse once. That much was clear from the way she held herself. Proud shoulders, even if they trembled now, and hands that knew how to mend what others broke. But life don't pay kindness in coin, and her coin had run out somewhere between where she'd been and where she was trying to go. She hadn't eaten in near 3 days. The last of her bread she'd given to a child who got off at Abilene. Her lips cracked, her breath shallow, and her hands clutched tight, round a little leather bag holding nothing but a faded paper, an address long smudged by hope and sweat. And then came the sound, slow hooves over hard dirt. He didn't ride in like thunder. No, sir. He came quiet, like the wind was whispering his name. Brown coat stiff from old sun, gray eyes under a low hat brim. He dismounted without a word and looked at her, not with pity, not like the rest, but with a kind of recognition, like he'd seen a mirror of his own soul sitting on that bench. "Come home," he said. Just that. Nothing more. She stared at him, and for a breath, she didn't move. Then she stood, her legs near buckled, but she stood, and with her bag in hand and what was left of her strength, she followed him off that platform. She didn't know his name, didn't know where he was taking her, but the bench was behind her, and the dust road ahead didn't feel quite so cruel. That was the first time she followed him. It wouldn't be the last. They walked a spell, her boots crunching on the hardpan trail, his horse moving slow as if it knew this was no time for hurrying. He never looked back, not once, but he didn't get too far ahead neither. He was like a mountain, always there, solid, silent. The wind pulled at her shawl like it was trying to drag her back, but she kept on. Not because she trusted him. Trust takes time and warm hands, but because those 2 words had lit a spark deep in her chest. Come home. After near an hour, the land shifted. A crooked fence appeared, strung with barbed wire and dust, lead in to a small square house sitting quiet under the wide Wyoming sky. A single bell hung from a gate post, rusted through but still there, like it remembered better times. He dismounted, opened the gate, and let it swing shut behind her with a clatter. No dogs barked. No welcome voice called out. Just the creak of the wind and the smell of cold earth. He didn't ask if she'd follow him inside. He just opened the door and waited. Inside was plain. One room for eating, sitting, and sleeping. Another tucked at the back for guests or ghosts. She couldn't tell which. A Bible rested on the table, next to an oil lamp with a cracked chimney. There weren't no lace, no flowers, no photographs. But it was clean. Lord, it was clean. He ladled stew from a pot on the stove, thick and smoky, and set it before her without a word. She ate with slow, shaking hands. It burned her tongue, but she didn't stop. It was the first real meal she'd had in longer than she could remember. Afterward, he stepped outside and left her alone with the quiet. She looked around that room, rough-hewn walls, a chair near the fire, a single plate on the table. It wasn't much, but it didn't feel like less. She found the little room at the back, cot made up with clean linen, a basin with fresh water, even a folded towel. There were no locks, no expectations, just space. She sat on the edge of the bed, the firelight flickering from the main room, and whispered something she hadn't said in years. "I'm still here." The next morning broke soft and slow, the kind of day that didn't announce itself with birdsong or sunshine, but with a stillness that seemed to hold its breath. She stirred beneath a wool blanket, the scent of smoke and stew clinging to the air like a memory. In the kitchen, he was already moving, quiet as fog, efficient as a farrier. Coffee brewed on the stove, black and strong. He didn't speak, and neither did she. Not at first. Words felt like too big a thing for the space they shared. He set a tin cup in front of her. "It's bitter," he said. She took a sip, and her lips twitched at the taste. "Bitter ain't always bad," she murmured. That earned the barest hint of a nod. It took till the second cup before she asked it, the thing that had been scratching at her thoughts like a restless colt. "What's your name?" He hesitated, hand wrapped round the handle of his own cup. "Calder," he said. "Used to be folks called me that before the war. And after it." That was all he gave her, but it was more than she'd expected. Calder was a man carved from stone and storm. Big hands, sharp jaw, eyes the color of a winter river, cold, deep, and unforgiving. He wasn't cruel, but he carried himself like a man who'd seen too much to be gentle. She told him her name was Evelyn. He nodded once, as if to say, "That'll do." After breakfast, she insisted on helping. He didn't argue. She swept the hearth, mended a tear in his coat with the needle she kept in her satchel, and boiled what was left of the stew bones into a broth that smelled of comfort. They didn't talk much, but they moved around each other like two ghosts starting to believe they were alive again. That night, she sat by the fire with her knees drawn up, watching the flames lick the old wood. "You always live out here?" she asked. "Since the war," he said, voice low. "What did you do before?" "Didn't matter," he replied. Then, after a pause, "I reckon I tried to forget most of it." She didn't press. Some memories are better left buried, where even the coyotes can't dig him up. She looked down at her hands, worn, weathered, and scarred in ways that didn't show. "I was a nurse," she said softly. "Chicago. Until things went wrong." Calder said nothing, but he looked at her then. Not just a glance. A real look, like he saw the weight she carried and respected it. For the first time since she stepped off that train, Evelyn didn't feel like she had to explain her story. She just had to live the next chapter. Calder never said much about where he'd come from. He worked his land like a man making peace with ghosts, quiet, hard, and alone. There were 3 horses in the corral, 1 barn barely standing, and a fence line that hadn't seen fresh nails in a year or more. He wasn't poor. Evelyn knew that soon enough. His clothes were worn but mended, his boots patched but polished. And in the barn, under a tarp, sat a wagon of fine mahogany wood with brass trim. Too pretty for a man living like this. "You were someone else once," she said one night, her voice just above the crackle of the fire. Calder looked at her, then nodded once. "A long time ago. You're still him." "Only in name," he said, "and names don't mean much out here." She didn't press him, but the more she watched, the more she saw. The way he measured every step, the way his eyes scanned the horizon like he expected trouble, the way his hand always hovered near his side, even when he wasn't wearing a gun. He was a man who'd known money, known danger, and walked away from both. It was 2 weeks before he asked, "You planning to stay?" Evelyn didn't answer right away. She was sitting on the porch, the sun stretching long over the dry hills, painting everything gold. A wind stirred her shawl, and she watched the dust dance like it was trying to speak. "I don't know where else I'd go," she finally said. That was enough for him. From then on, she worked the land beside him. She learned to mend fence, chop wood, and coax the old mule to pull the cart down into town. Calder gave her space, but not distance. He was always close, like a shadow with hands that knew both destruction and care. And slowly, ever so slowly, that place began to feel less like a shelter and more like a home. Then, one morning, the letter came. A rider delivered it, dusty, wind-burnt, and gone before his horse finished drinking. Calder didn't open it right away. He set it on the table, untouched for near an hour, until Evelyn, curious as a cat, finally asked, "You gonna read it?" He sighed, heavy and slow, then broke the seal. His eyes moved over the words, and something in him changed. Just a flicker, but she saw it. "What is it?" she asked. He folded the letter once, then tucked it into his coat. "Old trouble," he said. "Coming up the trail." That night, Calder sat out on the porch long after the fire had died and the wind had turned mean. Evelyn watched him through the window, hat low, shoulders stiff, as if waiting for something only he could see. And for the first time, she wondered if the man who saved her had been trying to escape something of his own. Calder didn't say the name that night, not to Evelyn, not to the stars, not even to the wind. But the letter still burned in his coat pocket, and the weight of it pulled at him like a stone in the riverbed. She didn't ask again, just kept to the chores and watched him closer, like a hawk perched over the prairie, waiting for the wind to shift. 3 days later, a man rode into the yard. He didn't come quiet like Calder had. No, this fella made dust rise with every step of his horse, boots sharp against the stirrups. A grin that cut like glass stretched across his face. He dismounted slow, deliberate. His hat was fine felt, his coat tailored, and his spurs sang like silver bells. "Well, I'll be," he said, tipping his hat toward Evelyn. "Didn't expect company out here." Calder stepped out of the barn, hand resting easy on the post. "Grady," he said. Evelyn felt the name land like thunder. "Calder," the man replied, spreading his arms like an old friend at a funeral. "Ain't this something? You still breathing?" Calder didn't move. "What do you want?" he asked. Grady laughed, deep and smooth. "You think you can walk away from a life like we lived? From what we built? This ain't your concern." Grady's eyes flicked to Evelyn. "Looks like you built something else now. Pretty thing. She know who you are. What you done?" Calder didn't flinch, but Evelyn saw his fingers twitch, just once, by his side. "I ain't that man no more," he said. Grady stepped closer. "That's so. Then maybe you won't mind if I go digging up what's buried." That's when Evelyn stepped forward, hands still dusted with flour from bread she'd been kneading. "You best say what you came to say," she said, voice calm, "or be on your way." Grady looked at her like a man eyeing a puzzle piece that didn't fit. Calder moved between them then. "You say your piece, Grady." The man's grin faded. "There's money missing," he said. "Back east. A lot of it. And your name's still on them papers." "I burned that life," Calder said. "Too bad the bank didn't," Grady replied. "They're coming. Maybe not tomorrow, but soon. You best be ready." With that, he tipped his hat and mounted up. As he turned, he called back over his shoulder, "Good luck with the girl, Calder. She looks like she still believes in things." Then he was gone in a cloud of dust, the sound of his hooves echoing long after he vanished over the ridge. That night, Calder sat by the fire, the old Bible open in his lap, though he didn't read a word. Evelyn sat across from him. "You gonna tell me the rest?" she asked. He looked at her, weariness in every line of his face. "Something bad happened back east," he said. "A deal went wrong. Men died. I walked away with blood on my hands and money in my pocket. I buried it all when I came west." "Accept the guilt," she said. He nodded. "Accept that." She stood, crossed the room, and sat beside him. "I ain't scared of the past," she whispered, "but I need to know if it's coming for you or for us." Calder looked at her then, truly looked, and for the first time, Evelyn saw the man he used to be, and the man he was trying to become. "It's coming for me," he said, "but I won't let it take you." The next few days passed like a knife through still water, slow, tense, with ripples reaching far wider than they showed. Calder was quieter than usual, and that was saying something. He spent more time in the barn, oiling his old rifle, checking the tack, walking the fence line like he was listening for ghosts. Evelyn didn't ask questions, not 'cause she wasn't burning with them, but because she knew a man like Calder needed to speak in his own time. You don't tug at a rope you don't know the end of. Instead, she did what she could. Fixed up the pantry, cleaned the hearth, and stitched a fresh lining into his coat. She left the past where it lay and kept her hands busy, but her mind drifted, always back to that name, Grady Black. It sounded like smoke, like fire, like the kind of man who left ashes behind. On the fourth day, a stranger came down the trail. Not Grady. This one was lean, young, dressed in city cloth, and riding, a gelding too fine for local work. He dismounted, walked up like he was selling books, and tipped his hat. "Mr. Calder?" Calder stepped out from the shadows of the barn, coat unbuttoned, rifle leaned just inside the door. "I ain't buying," he said flatly. The man smiled thin. "Not selling. Name's Corbin. I represent the interest of Oakmere Bank, Boston." Evelyn stepped onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. Calder didn't glance her way, but he shifted slightly, just enough to put himself between her and the man. "Grady send you." Calder asked. Corbin's smile didn't budge. Mr. Black is a client. This is independent business. I paid what I owed, Calder said. No, sir. You disappeared before the final note. And now there's questions about a missing sum, substantial. Mr. Black has suggested you might have taken it, perhaps accidentally. Evelyn's fists clenched at her sides. Calder didn't move. I didn't take a damn thing that wasn't already ruined. Corbin raised an eyebrow. Then you won't mind coming back east. Sort things proper. No. Then we'll be back with lawmen next time. You come with lawmen, best be sure your papers are clean, Calder said, voice low as thunder before a storm. Corbin's smile finally faded. Suit yourself, he said, mounting back up. But storms don't stay on the horizon forever, Mr. Calder. He turned and rode off, leaving behind a silence so thick it could have been poured like molasses. That night, Calder didn't touch his supper. Evelyn sat beside him on the porch, wrapped in her shawl. You think they'll come? She asked. I know they will, he said. She looked at him, her voice barely more than wind. Then we get ready. He turned to her, startled. You ain't got to stay. Evelyn's eyes were steady. I ain't got to breathe either. But I do. He didn't answer, but his hand reached out slow, found hers, and held it like it was the last truth he had left. The sun rose the next morning, hid behind a veil of yellow dust that painted the sky the color of bad omens. Calder was already saddled up, his rifle strapped across his back, jaws set like stone. Evelyn met him at the gate, a scarf tied round her hair, eyes tired but sharp. Where you headed? She asked. North pasture. Gonna check the high ridge. If trouble comes, it'll come from there. I'll watch the house, she said. Calder hesitated, then reached into his coat and handed her a small, iron-handled revolver. It felt heavier than it looked. You ever shoot? He asked. Evelyn nodded once. Only when I meant to. His lips twitched, not quite a smile but something close. He rode out alone, disappearing into the amber haze. She stood there long after he vanished, gun tucked in her apron, heart beating like hoofbeats. By midday, the dust had thickened. The house felt too quiet, too still. Then came the first knock, not on the door, but on the wall. A soft tap, like fingers drumming on wood. She spun around, gun raised. Ma'am, came a voice, smooth as whiskey and just as dangerous. Ain't here to scare ya. Grady Black stepped through the back door like he owned the place. You got gall, Evelyn said, keeping the revolver steady. He smiled like the devil wearing Sunday clothes. I just came to talk. Ain't nothing you could say I'd believe. Then maybe you'll believe this. He pulled a folded paper from his coat and tossed it onto the table. A deed. Calder's signature at the bottom, but not his handwriting. I forged it, Grady said. 5 years ago. Took what I could, blamed him, and ran like the coward I am. Why are you telling me now? Grady shrugged. Man gets tired of running. Figure if I couldn't beat Calder, maybe I could confess. Maybe he'll kill me and get it over with. Before Evelyn could answer, the front door opened, and there stood Calder, dust-covered, rifle at his side, eyes blazing. Put it down, Grady, he said. Grady raised both hands, slow. I'm done, he said. No more tricks. Calder looked at Evelyn, then at the paper on the table. He stepped forward, picked it up, studied the signature. You gonna kill me? Grady asked, almost hopeful. No, Calder said, voice flat. You ain't worth burying that. Grady blinked. Then what? You're gonna leave that deed, that horse, and every coin in your pocket. Then you're gonna walk, clear out of this county. If I see you again, I ain't talking. Grady hesitated, then nodded. He emptied his pockets, left the deed, and walked out. No protest. No fight. When the door shut, the silence returned. Calder turned to Evelyn. You all right? She nodded. You. He looked down at the paper, then back at her. I am now. He stepped closer, took her hand, calloused meeting calloused, both scarred, both strong. This ain't over, he said. No, she agreed. But it's ours now. Spring came slow that year, pushing back against the frost like a mule too stubborn to lie down. But come it did, inch by inch. The snow melted off the ridges, the creek trickled again, and the grass returned with a hesitant kind of green. Calder spent most days mending what winter had broken. The barn roof, the corral gate, his own bones, maybe. Evelyn patched clothes, baked bread, and read aloud from a stack of old books they found boxed in the attic. Stories of lands far away, kings and quests, nothing that felt half as wild as what they'd already lived. But peace, well, peace don't ride in without trouble sniffing at its heels. One morning, a rider came again, this one older, wearing a star on his vest and an uneasy look on his face. "Marshal Thompson," he said, tipping his hat. "Calder, miss." "Ma'am." Calder stepped off the porch slow. "You here for Grady?" The marshal shook his head. "Ain't seen him since that letter reached the bank back east. They cleared your name. That forgery, it's all tied up now. No charges. No debts." Evelyn let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "There's more," the marshal added, pulling a yellowed envelope from his satchel. "Letter from a lawyer out of Denver. Some old ranch deed. Looks like someone left you something." He handed the letter to Calder and rode off, the sound of his horse fading into the wind. Calder opened the envelope slow. Inside was a writ, land bigger than his own, far south near Santa Fe, left to him by a man named Harlan Mercer. "I knew him," Calder muttered. "Years ago. Fought beside him once. Saved his boy's life. Never thought I'd hear that name again." Evelyn studied him. "You think it's real?" Calder nodded. "Only one way to find out." But it wasn't the land that had her attention. It was the shift in his voice. Hope, the kind that didn't come often, not to men like Calder. That night, they sat on the porch, the stars stretching wide above them. "You think you'd ever leave this place?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. "I think," he began, then paused. "I think I'd go where you go." Her eyes shone in the firelight. "You sure about that?" He looked at her like a man staring down a canyon. Nothing but truth between him and the bottom. "I ain't sure about much," he said, "but I'm sure about you." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and for a long moment, neither of them said a word. The fire crackled, the night sighed, and the world, for once, felt still. In that quiet, they both knew the past might come calling again, but it'd find the door barred, the hearth warm, and two souls ready to face whatever rode in next. They left come early June. Calder packed the wagon careful, 2 rifles, 3 blankets, a crate of books Evelyn couldn't bear to leave, and every tool that had built the life they were stepping away from. Evelyn sat beside him on the bench seat, hands tucked under her shawl, heart both heavy and light. They'd buried old things on that land, wounds, secrets, a piece of each of their pasts, and now they were riding toward something unclaimed, something new. The road south was rough. Dust kicked up with every wheel turn. Nights were cold, and days burned hot enough to blister skin. But they didn't complain. They talked in slow rhythm, stories traded between bites of jerky and sips of coffee cooked over fire. Calder told her of battles fought without glory, friends buried under strange stars. Evelyn spoke of hospital tents, of children who never made it, of dreams folded up and packed away. But they also spoke of tomorrow, of a house with wide windows, of a creek where chickens could roam, of a tree for swinging, should they ever have a reason to build one. On the 12th day, they reached the land, a stretch of red earth framed by cottonwoods and stone. A cabin still stood, barely, its roof bowed like an old man's back, but the bones were strong. "It's not much," Calder said, climbing down from the wagon. Evelyn joined him, her boots sinking into the warm dirt. "It's ours," she said. That night, they laid their bedrolls on the floorboards, and through the broken window, watched stars rise like sparks off an anvil. In the dark, Calder reached for her hand. "I've been thinking," he said. "Dangerous," she teased. "Maybe," he said with a chuckle. "But I'm thinking we don't keep running. I'm thinking we make this place something. Not just for us, for whoever might come after." "You mean children?" she asked, her voice soft. "Or wanderers," he said. "Lost souls. Folk like we were. Give him a place to land." She nodded slow. "A place called Mercy," she said. Calder smiled in the dark. That'll do. Time moved different out there, slower, gentler. Days turned to weeks, weeks to months. The land grew beneath their hands, same as their love. They built it all from the bones up, Calder with hammer and timber, Evelyn with garden rows and a warm hearth. They called it Mercy Ranch. Folks said the name came from the land, but anyone who'd ever sat at their table knew it came from them. Word traveled, how it does in small towns, slipping through saloon doors and hitching rides on wagon wheels. First came a widowed schoolmarm with 2 sons, then a scarred old buffalo hunter who couldn't sleep indoors no more. Later, a Cherokee girl run from a preacher with a cruel tongue. Calder never turned one away. Evelyn always had a place at the table. It wasn't a mission, it wasn't a church, but it was something holy all the same. Years passed. The house grew, room by room, soul by soul. Mercy became more than a ranch. It was a refuge, a quiet answer to a loud, cruel world. And in town, folks still whispered the old story. The nurse who came off the train with nothing but a smudged dress and a frostbit heart. The cowboy who found her there, more ghost than man. The life they carved from dust and blood and faith. Some swore Calder had once been a millionaire back east, a man with a name sharp enough to slice steel. Others claimed Evelyn had nursed generals in the war, seen things that'd make a preacher weep. No one ever proved it. No one ever needed to, because the legend wasn't in what they'd done, it was in what they gave. Mercy. One morning, many years on, a traveler stopped at the ranch. He found a young couple running it now, a dark-haired woman and her husband with kind eyes and a steady hand. When he asked about the place, they pointed to the hill where 2 wooden crosses stood beneath a cottonwood tree. The traveler asked if they were buried there. No, the man said with a smile. They ain't buried nowhere, just remembered. The wind shifted then, stirring the leaves just so. And some say, if you stand quiet by that tree, you can still hear her laughter, still see him in the distance, riding slow toward home.